Your Excellencies, dear colleagues, dear students, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon, good morning, or good evening, according to where you are. Welcome to this high-level conversation organized by the Global South Caucus of International Studies Association in the framework of UN75. We are delighted to have today 6 top scholars and practitioners who will share their perspective on the contribution of the Global South to the future of multilateralism. My name is Delidji Eric De Gila. I'm the chair of ISA Global South Caucus, an academic platform dedicated to promote the study of the South as a whole, relevant South societies in the North, and relations between the North and the South within the international society. Before I give the floor to our distinguished panelists, following an alphabetical order, except for the first and the last one, I would like to invite my colleague, Professor Christian Gledish, President-elected of ISA, to offer his opening remarks.
Thank you.
Christian, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I am not planning to take up much of the time since we only have 90 minutes and quite a large panel and many participants. But I did want to emphasize on behalf of the ISA that it's very pleasing to see this growing partnership with the United Nations and the United Nations at 75 initiative. Many international study scholars have, of course, taken a great deal of interest in the development and consequence of the United Nations for issues such as development, security, and conflict resolution. And as such, it is fantastic to have this opportunity to extend collaboration and dialogue between academic scholars and practitioners, and for individual researchers to be able to contribute to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goal agenda. I, for one, anticipate that I can learn much from this initiative and dialogue in my own work on how the UN may have played a part in contributing to the decline of armed conflict that we've seen. At this point, I would like to pass the word back to Professor De Gila and the panelists, and I'd like to thank again the organizers for their contribution to making this event and dialogue possible.
Thank you very much, Christian, for these great remarks. And we are very delighted to have this event in the framework of a partnership with the United Nations. Thank you for being with us, Christian. The topic of our conversation today is linked to several but intertwined theoretical debates in the field of international relations. In 2006, you published, Christian, with 2 other colleagues, a journal article on refugees and the spread of civil war. Obviously, the issue of human mobility remains critical in the future of multilateralism. More broadly, our conversation may form part of the prevalent debate of the nature of international system. Almost 30 years ago, Helen Milner, the current president of ISA, engaged a critical discussion on the anarchical nature of the international system due to an absence of a central authority. Celebrating today UN at 75, can we continue to see the United Nations system as a collective project, a sort of common horizon of multilateralism? If so, how the Global South can contribute in? Now I'm very pleased to give the floor to our first panelist, Anita Prakash, Director of Policy Relations, Office of President, Economic Research Institute for ASEAN. Good evening in Jakarta, Anita, and thank you very much for being with us to share your views through an economic perspective?
Thank you very much. Thank you, Eric. Eric has been my colleague at the Graduate Institute. And I'm very happy to touch base with you again. And also very happy to bring the perspectives from Southeast Asia and East Asia to this very important theme that you have raised, Eric. Going by your instructions, I'm trying to limit whatever I have to say within 8 minutes time, less than 8 minutes. What exactly is Southeast Asia and East Asia's perspective on supporting and strengthening multilateralism and the global systems, global governance systems? Well, I think all of us here know that Southeast Asia and East Asia have underwritten the global economic growth in the past decade, and especially all through the global financial crisis. The phenomenal rise of ASEAN and China, the economic strength of Korea, Japan, Taiwan, Hong Kong, all are made possible through the rules-based systems, the peace and security embedded in the global governance mechanisms, and in complying with international laws. In fact, Asia has strongly resisted the global headwinds that are challenging openness and reforms in global governance and strengthening of multilateralism. But the point I'm trying to make here is that Asia also needs to do much more than just resisting the global headwinds. The governments in this region are prone to prefer short-term bilateral plans over longer-term multilateral solutions. Most recently, it can be seen in the response towards managing the US-China tensions, trade tensions. It can also be seen in the response to managing the COVID-19 crisis. So the real message that I'm trying to give here is that Southeast Asia and East Asia governments need to show more leadership on the global systems and come out in full support of reforms. Emerging Asia relies on the global systems for their trade and prosperity. They rely on Paris Agreement to address climate change goals. They rely on WHO to address global health challenges. And then most importantly, they rely on international laws on the sea to secure the sea linkages in different parts of Indian Ocean. So in total, global systems and multilateralism are vital to Asia's interest. But somehow the attention towards the global call for strengthening of multilateralism is missing in most parts of this region. For example, the undermining of the WTO dispute settlement process, the contempt for trade rules and trade partners, lack of consensus in Paris Agreement, the fledgling leadership in WHO. In all these scenarios, have we really seen Southeast Asia and East Asia's role or heard its voice in full measure? This is a very important question. Instead, I mean, what we have seen is that big economic powers like China, Japan, even South Korea, they have sort of sidelined the multilateral system in trade disputes and created their own bilateral and multilateral platforms, plurilateral, I'm sorry. During the COVID-19 crisis, also, we have seen confrontation and suspicion among countries. The arrival of vaccine actually and its distribution among nations will be a good pointer to this problem, because every country seems to be on its own. So multilateralism currently is far from perfect, but Asia has benefited immensely from these systems. So we need to see a little more effort in this region to support multilateralism. And Asia must be, emerging Asia especially, must be using platforms such as G20 to incentivize multilateralism, to reform WTO. The current pandemic is actually an opportunity to promote multilateralism, but perhaps Asia will be better able to do this job if US reaches out more to this region as a whole. And the same goes for EU too. Although EU is better engaged with Southeast Asia and East Asia. The signs ahead look positive, but time seems to be running out. So if Asia really wants the multilateral systems to survive, then it needs to promote it, use it, and reform it. And Asia can do it. There are already some very important examples here. The setting up of Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank, the Sendai framework, the global governance of connectivity, Indo-Pacific. These are all very important examples coming out of Asia, emerging Asia itself. So I personally feel that emerging Asia will still play an important role in supporting multilateralism if important partners like US, the European Union create better dialogue mechanisms with emerging Asia on this very important global concern. And the reverse message here is that taking Asia together will be important for international partners. So with that, I'll stop, Eric, and very happy to take more questions later after my other colleagues have spoken. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Anita. So Southeast Asia and East Asia should be more committed. This is what I note. Thank you very much for your contribution. À présent, j'ai le plaisir de donner la parole au professeur Bertrand BADIE, professeur émérite à Sciences Po Paris. I will not take the risk to enumerate here the prolific scholarship of Bertrand. I will only mention his critical essay published in 2018 titled Quand le Sud réinvente le monde, essai sur la puissance de la faiblesse. My translation, When the South Reinvents the World, an essay on the power of weakness. Bertrand, please.
Thank you, Eric. I'm very, very pleased to participate in this panel and also honored to have been selected as one of the panelists today. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and maybe good night to all the participants. In a few minutes, I would try to make 2 or 3 points in my presentation. First of all, we have to keep in mind that UN multilateralism was totally conceived and created in 1945 apart from Global South, even ignoring the main issues which are at stake in this part of the world, in these parts of the world. I would mention development, human insecurity, food insecurity, health and security, and all these issues were taking into account much later. The charter and I would say the spirit of the creation of UN multilateralism was dominated by all the Westphalian concepts, which don't fit at all to all the Global South countries, and stressing on all the classic Westphalian concepts. I would mention power, sovereignty, territory, and also, and I have to stress at this point, the Clausewitzian and Western conception of war. That's why the initial charter of the UN, which is still on, and the practice were totally conceived for exclusively dealing with Western and I would say North and developed countries. And we have also to keep in mind that this exclusion was continued just after and during long years and even after decolonization. It was, the Global South was kept aside as a major principle of UN multilateralism during bipolarity and the Cold War time. For instance, if we consider the government of UN, we have to remember that some candidacy coming from the Global South were regularly rejected. For instance, the Nehru sisters or the Iranian Nasrallah Intizam were candidates for and competing for being Secretary General of the UN and were rejected. And they preferred the European candidacy with the candidacy of Dag Hammarskjöld. And we have also to take into account that when decolonization took place, there was only very small adaptation of the UN institutions, creating, for instance, important agencies like the UNCTAD, that to say the CNUSED, the UNCTD, or the UN Conference for Trade and Development, or the UNDP, which is a very famous and important agency that we have, of course, to respect and that I respect, but was created as one of the rare new institutions adapted to this new world, which was created by the decolonization. So there is a very strong resistance of the initial UN multilateralism for containing the Global South. And I would add also that when decolonization took place, there was a comeback of the Security Council as the main center of power inside the UN institutions, because the Security Council was controlled by the old powers. Now, my point would be to try to take into account the adaptation of the Global South to this UN multilateral system. I would say that Global South had successively 3 positions. None of them has ever been faded, but it was a kind of accumulation. The first step, the first position, was to create a protest diplomacy. Protest diplomacy is a new concept which didn't exist before decolonization. But when the Global South entered the UN system, and that the UN system didn't really adapt to this new world, the Global South countries had a very interesting and strong reaction that was protest diplomacy. As we are not associated to the government of the United Nations, we are obliged to stay in a protest position. Protest diplomacy was animated, as you know, after the Algiers, the famous Algiers conference, and was animated by the G77, which is constituted by many other countries, other states now. This protest diplomacy play a very important role in the transformation of international relations. That's to say, as a challenge to the old international order, as also a new dynamics inside the international system. And this protest diplomacy controlled the major parts of the UN institutions, and particularly the General Assembly. But after the fall of the Berlin Wall, we observed a second position of the Global South. The break took place during the 90s with the invention of the concept of human security. Of course, the concept of human security is not exclusively a concept shaped and coined from the Global South, but we have to take into account that human security, as it was defined and invented by the UNDP in 1994, was probably the first step of a reaffirmation of the role and the positive role, not only a protest role, but the positive role of the Global South. Keep in mind that two very distinguished economists coming from Pakistan, Mahbub al-Haq, and from India, Amartya Sen, played a very crucial role in inventing this concept, even if other scholars, other actors were playing also this role from ours. But this was, first of all, the role of the Global South economists. And also human security was the right expression of the new issues which were shaping the post-bipolar world and especially shaping the Global South world. If you take into account, for instance, food security, health security, and even environment security, all these issues were first of all rooted in the, I would say, the normal and the daily life of the Global South countries. So I would say that Global South helped to get aware of these new international social issues, much more than the old issues coming from the Western culture of war and competition. I will put an end to my presentation by the last step we have to consider now. Now, beyond this recognition of the social international issues, and beyond the role of these famous conferences of the UN, which took place generally in southern countries, for instance, the Conference on Environment, which took place in Rio in 1992, the Conference on Population, which took place in Cairo in 94, the Conference on Housing, which took place in Istanbul in 96, or on racism, which took place in Durban, for instance. Beyond that, now we observe a third step and the third position of Global South in the new international relation. As Global South now is the real center of the new international relations for two reasons. First of all, because the main issues are coming from the south more than from the north. You know that starvation is killing about 9 million people every year. That health security is damaging the world, as we can observe now with the COVID, but which we could observe, for instance, every year before the COVID crisis, when malaria killed 500,000 people in Africa every year. That's to say, these new global issues, this new conception of a global security is really sprung from the dynamics of the Global South. But Global South is also the place of the new conflict. Europe is no more the battlefield of the world. The battlefield of the world has moved to Africa and Middle East. And this new conflictuality, this new kind of conflict, which is quite different from the Westphalian War, is now really in the hands of the local actors. That's to say, the time of manipulating and ruling the wars from the two superpowers is totally over. Superpowers are not able to change, to contain, or to put an end to the international conflict. Now the new conflicts are in the hands of the local actors and give then to the Global South actors a new responsibility and probably a new capacity of ruling the international order. That is to say, that is why I consider, when you were friendly quoting my book on reinvention of the world from the South, that's to say, the main point is that the solution of the new international conflicts can only come from Global South and South actors. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup, cher Bertrand, for your illuminating remarks. So now the Global South has a key role to play as a real center. I quote you. Thank you very much. We will continue this conversation. Now I'm delighted to give the floor to my colleague and old friend from Japan, Professor Aigul Kulnazarova, Professor of International Relations and International Law at Tama University in Tokyo. Under her coordination, we published last year an edited volume on global approaches to peace, in which I underlined, with my co-author Charles Megan, the critical contribution of Africa and the African Union to promote peace, as Bertrand underlines, in a very nuanced perspective through this Agenda 2063. But we can discuss it further later. Thank you very much, Aigul, for being with us by night. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me well?
Yes, please.
Okay. So hello, everyone. First, I want to congratulate the entire UN community and all those who support the community on the stage, behind the stage, and beyond the stage with this remarkable anniversary event, UN75. And secondly, I want to thank organizations and individuals, especially my old friend, Dr. Eric de Gila, for organizing this panel on the contribution of the Global South to the future of multilateralism. So I will be focusing very precisely on the contribution, on the first word of this title. So I want to follow up on my previous, on the previous speakers, some important points. Professor BADIE, when he said that the idea of multilateralism is not new. It is true, it emerged after the Second World War, but now its original principles based on international trade, monetary system, and security are being revised. And these changes are mainly due to the coming or arrival of multiple, diverse, and new players, especially emerging frameworks at the regional level challenge global multilateralism, or as the previous speaker precisely addressed this as the UN multilateralism. So the world is also transforming, putting forward new challenges. So the original, again, framework of global or UN multilateralism has been expanding to include such new problems of environmental nature, nuclear disarmament, and others. So today I would like to specifically highlight one area, firstly, which is firstly directly related to my current project and research interest, and secondly, an area where I think the countries of the Global South can potentially contribute through regional and global multilateral agenda. The area I'm talking about is conflict resolution and sustainable post-conflict peace building. Why do I think that the countries of the Global South can contribute, and maybe significantly, to this area because firstly, as we know, most of the conflicts, especially after the end of the Cold War, have taken place in the Global South. And there are many reasons behind. Firstly, the world order based on bilateralism had collapsed, and the previous two superpowers could not anymore invest, contribute, or influence those dynamics of wars, civil wars, conflicts, etc. And secondly, again, the world order was changing, which we're now going once again. So conventional approaches to conflict resolution, such as negotiation, mediation, other diplomatic means, or military interventions, have not seriously taken into consideration internal dynamics of a conflict. They haven't very often, they haven't, for example, addressed causal structural issues of those local conflicts. Even most of them had some spillover effect, as we know that after the Cold War, most of the interstate conflicts have also transformed to intrastate with some spillover effects on neighboring territories. So these important dimensions of any conflict, such as dynamics, actors, of course, or causal structural issues, have been to a less extent addressed by external or conventional approaches. So therefore, today, I think that the countries of the Global South, which have this past and bitter experience of conflict involvement, they can contribute by proposing through regional, I stress on the word regional, and global multilateral frameworks by proposing alternative approaches to conflict resolution and post-conflict peace building. What is important here is to address community-based issues, because as you know, those external or conventional approaches have not often addressed those community-based issues. And importantly, in countries of the Global South, people have very deep relational traditions. And this focus, I think, is very important to address because, in my opinion, any multilateralism without humanity have no future. So this human aspect, we know that even security arena has been expanded to include human security concept, but still, this is not enough. So I think for the countries of the Global South, it will be very important to address and share through multilateral frameworks, these internal dynamics, internal issues, and maybe propose their own alternative conflict resolution mechanisms and modalities as well. So that's what I wanted to say today, and invite my fellow panelists to also take the discussion in this direction, because in my opinion, these conventional approaches, the result of these conventional approaches is that they always aim to end a conflict, to end the conflict without addressing deeper issues. And the result of such approach is that today we have a good number of frozen or protracted social conflicts in all regions of the world, including Europe. So Europe is not exclusion. So one of the recent example would be this war that broke out recently between Armenia and Azerbaijan for a long disputed Nagorno-Karabakh in the former Soviet Eurasia. So this conflict is not new. So almost after 3 decades, this conflict erupted again. So now the conflict is stopped by the help of Russian peacekeeping forces, but how about communities that live in those territories? And how long those communities should wait this conflict to erupt again? So this is, again, once again, they are intentionally freezing this conflict. And this is certainly a protracted conflict as well. So I think only bringing to the table conventional approaches is no longer enough. So alternative approaches, most importantly, addressing community-based issues are very important. So in this area, in this aspect, I strongly believe that the countries of the Global South can potentially contribute to global and regional multilateralism. So they need to strengthen dialogue, they need to continue their discussions, they need to continue to share and exchange their experiences. Although most of those experiences are bitter, but now those bitter experiences can be turned into some future alternative framework. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kulnazarova, dear Aigul, for your illuminating remarks, and that we share several perspectives on how to focus more on human being when you want to deal with peace and security. And this is actually the perspective of the African Union, but we can discuss it further. Now I'm privileged to give the floor to Professor Jacques Markovitch, Professor Emeritus of International Affairs and former Rector of University of Sao Paulo in Brazil, to share with us his perspective from South America. Jacques has an outstanding career of scholars, as well as university top manager. He published in 2011 an important book on GHG emissions reduction and management in the Amazon. I'm sure that he will discuss the critical issue of climate governance and how the Global South can contribute in, among other topics. Jacques, please.
Yes, thank you very much, Eric. I would like, first of all, to thank you all for this outstanding opportunity, to President-elect Christian Gledic, to Tiki Lembi, to Eric, and as well to all the organizers for meeting to discuss the Global South to the future of multilateralism. First of all, I would like to share with you a perspective that we are moving to a new era. Effectively, some people are trying to get to a new normal, but my impression is that this acceleration of trends is taking us to a new era. And we can remind the Gutenberg printed words, industrial revolution, the digital revolution that we are living now. So this is the world that we are supposed to build in a completely new environment. I think I will follow much more Anita's reflection on doing more in our regions. This is what I will probably approach in the few minutes. Bertrand stimulated us with this idea of protest diplomacy, moving to human security, to environmental issues, and now more and more an interdependence among our countries. And this interdependence was even underlined by the sanitary crisis. I mean, COVID-19 is a good example where the so-called stated nation borders are very fragile and they are almost non-existing when we are facing a health crisis. In the environmental issue, some countries like Brazil, Indonesia, Congo, because they have the tropical forestry that are remaining, are becoming incontournable in the discussion of the environmental issues. So this is the new environment. My question to Professor Bertrand later on is where China stands. Is China part of the G77, or if China is the G2 with the US? I mean, the protest diplomacy was the beginning of the G77, but things evolved very, very quickly. And maybe this would be an interesting approach that Bertrand could help us to understand the role of China in this world that we are building. My perception is that to provide 5 priorities regarding the moment that we are living to build the role of Global South in multilateralism, I would begin suggesting revisiting always the global trends. Demography, with Africa moving to 4 billion inhabitants, the human geographies that is changing, technology with the impact of digitalization, climate and biodiversity that are conditioning the ecology, a slowdown in the economy that is engaging the developed world, and finally the democracy being impacted by polarization. So we need to begin always thinking on 2 principles. Which are the principles that will help us to define few priorities? The first principle has to do with the promotion of human development in harmony with economic growth, social inclusion, and environmental sustainability. And the second, that we have to ensure good governance with qualified leaders, robust strategies, monitoring of goals, thus transcending government and promoting close collaboration with local and regional social agents. So this is the principle that will guide the 5 priorities that I would like to share with you. Those 5 priorities are sustainability, digitalization, institutions, UN system, and governance. So I will be very brief in introducing each one of them, and then maybe in the debate we can deepen in the discussion. Well, regarding sustainability, we have some few instruments. We have the Paris Accord, we have the ODS, the Sustainable Development Goal, the SDGs 2030. For us, in the case of South America, we have the Amazon region that is a priority not only for the region, but for the world. So if we are in full compliance with the goals recorded in these agreements, then we have a certificate of good environmental management. The question is how each one of our countries could show the way to comply with the national determined contribution that were agreed in Paris, so we can ask and we can request from the developed countries to comply with their commitments, including in financial terms. Regarding digitalization, I mean, we live the real paradox with the physical distance that brings us closer by digital means. And this meeting is an example on how physical distance is bringing us together. In the 2020 crisis, the question is how to adapt the experience of face-to-face immersion to internet technology, and simultaneously, how can we promote social inclusion through connectivity? We have the example of Togo. Togo has evolved very quickly in digital connectivity. Transfer of minimum wages or minimum resources is being done through iPhones or through telephones. This is something that in many Latin American countries still don't have. So the question is, how can we, as South countries, move on in these new technology that will help us to connect among ourselves and among our other countries? We have a question with 5G and 6G, because 6G is already something that China is considering. My question is if these technologies are suitable to integrate our communities in the South. My impression is that we have to move to universal access to digital world, and this universal access, we need the technology adapted to this objective. 5G and 6G are much more exclusive and not so inclusive as we know. The third priority has to do with what we could call institutions. And that will include university and higher education institutions as an example. The question is how to move from university-centric metrics to society-centric metrics. Many institutions have their metrics and they are much more concerned with their own performance than to respond to societal needs. So institutions has to do exactly with looking at societal needs, not only in our region, but also globally, and identify ways to respond to these societal needs. The SDGs are a good term of reference that we should consider, but this is one of the moves that we might consider. The fourth priority has to do with the UN system. And I do remember the citation from Dag Hammarskjöld when he said that the UN mission was not to raise humanity to heaven, but to save it from hell. Hence, the multilateralism is to promote cooperation initiatives that make the UN an active hub. And this concept of hub is extremely important to address major international problems. It's a place where we can meet all together, and we have to ensure that we can meet to dialogue, to hear the other. And obviously, this has to do with fighting polarization that exclude the other from our own dialogue. Finally, we have to move to good governance. And good governance is the fifth priority that I would like to submit to you, has to do with leadership, strategy, and monitoring. How to select qualified people to take responsibility, to discuss the strategy, and to ensure monitoring beyond the 2 or 4 years of democratic election. The issue is how to keep, like the SDGs, this for a longer time. I will conclude arguing that the combined health, economic, social crisis confronting our countries come at a time where the demands placed by society have never been higher, but neither has the opportunity to do good. This will only be possible if leaders focus on the values that tie our community together and ensure that these values move toward the search for excellence. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup, cher Jacques. Thank you very much for this illuminating remarks that we will continue to discuss. Before I give the floor to my dear friend Sylvia, I would like to invite you to our polling. You can see on our screen polling the future of the United Nations. And feel free to answer. You have a question. Do you think that the United Nations will still be a relevant global organization 75 years from today? Well, Professor Sylvia Nunes is a professor of international relations and former director of the Center for Research on North America at UNAM, Universidad Nacional Autónoma de Mexico. I've been privileged to visit this university city. I think it's the largest university I've been. And of course, I received a very warm welcome, and I'm pleased to go back every time to your place, dear Sylvia. Bonjour au Mexique. Some argues that human mobility can fuel conflict dynamics. How can we deal efficiently with migration challenges, especially in a global South beyond a security discourse? Sylvia is a renowned expert on migration, and thank you very much for being with us, Sylvia, to share your views. Please.
Good morning, everyone. Good night. It is a pleasure for me to participate in this relevant forum. I would like to express my appreciation to Professor Eric de Gila for inviting me to share with you a few remarks on this region. A region that, from my perspective, also Mexico and Central America are considered in the Global South. I live in a country that insists that Mexico is a part of North America, and you all know that the relation between Mexico and the United States is a unique relation. We face asymmetrical interdependence on a daily basis, and my country struggles every single day in order to have the recognition of the United States. And in this trend, the situation of migration is a center debate, especially in COVID times. I would start by saying that I think that multilateralism is being tested by COVID-19 as we never expected. And in the case of these regions, Central America and Mexico, I must recognize that unfortunately we have no this debate nowadays on multilateralism, but the only debate is about survival and how are we going to solve this health crisis, and especially what has come with COVID-19, that is an unexpected economic crisis with more poverty, more unemployment, more violence, and of course, more insecurity. So I will elaborate some remarks about migration in this area of the world, considering that when focusing on the Global South, it is important to note that the economic impact of this COVID-19 is having a severe effect on low and middle income migrant and refugee destination countries, as they will continue to grow at a lower rate than other low and middle income countries. Many of these countries, particularly the ones I'm referring to, Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, and the southern region of my own country, Mexico, are confronting an extremely severe economic crisis, experiencing reduced incomes and increasing extreme poverty and declining the perspectives of economic growth. Based on these issues, I would like to mention that it is important for me to broaden this conversation, dividing this conversation into different issues. One, the impact on migrants and human mobility, and secondly, strengthening the multilateral approaches to incorporate this situation in a multilateral perspective. So impacts on migrants and human mobility, while we witness governments, and this is the case exactly of the region I'm living in, are trying to adjust their immigration practices to accommodate new processes and controls on mobility. A growing integration between public health imperatives and immigration policies will be needed for the future management of migration as a whole. Nonetheless, let us not forget that the introduction of new measures will require substantial and costly adjustments driven by the technical capacities required for their development. Each country has different levels of development, and this situation needs to be addressed. And this is, of course, not an easy task. We have been observing what is happening here with the people that wanted to make it to the United States, transit migrants that didn't make it to the US even before the COVID-19 situation erupted, and remain in Mexico without wanting to be here. So they have been especially affected because my country doesn't have the means to provide for their care. We don't even have, for example, a network of places for them to stay. We have also been able to identify how in this situation of crisis, they have been able to be resilient communities in some areas where they have been able to find some empathy with locals. Unfortunately, this has not been the case in the whole country. These people that are here in the expectation of having a solution about their requests for going to the United States now are dispersed in the whole territory of Mexico, and some responses to this situation have been very violent, and we also focus red points of xenophobia and violence against these refugees. Anyway, we also have been lucky in terms of identifying something that was very unusual for the Mexican case. And this is exactly one of the relevant issues of this COVID-19 situation in regard to the United Nations. Now Mexican population has been able to realize what different organizations from the United Nations are able to do. This is a clear example of what IOM has been doing in Mexico, supporting migrants, supporting refugees, and also UNHCR. So this is interesting because the people of the different communities and many provinces in Mexico were so distant from these ideas about what the United Nations are made for. And so this is a good opportunity to bring this organization back to a local and provincial discussion, to recapture the idea about multilateralism through the United States. One other thing that I would like to mention, especially here, is that as a reference from Latin America and the Caribbean, as I said, the situation of the Venezuelans in this region of the Global South is very relevant in COVID times, and also as an issue that needs to be discussed more broadly in a multilateral arena. The solidarity, however, has been emerged in this COVID-19 situation, but this solidarity is not enough. So in order to strengthen multilateral approaches in this region of the world, I think that it is still very early to have a deep analysis on how each country is been responding to the critical situation. And so it is the new challenges are yet to be fully understood. But in our region, migration across borders will continue more broadly because the economic situation is so bad that we have seen, for example, that now new numbers of Mexican migrants are trying to make it to the United States. And no matter the Mexican government considered last year that the net migration between Mexico and the US was already zero. Well, this is not the case. We don't know how this situation is going to be dealt with the new government in America. But we are also facing new migrant caravans coming into Mexico, seeking for a better future. So anyway, on a positive note, the pandemic has also become an opportunity for states to understand that migrants are the movers for development. Migration has been and will remain an overwhelmingly positive experience, enriching migrants, their families, and communities in both sending, transit, and receiving countries. And my closing remarks are that COVID-19 has demonstrated the need for a strong investment in global coordination mechanism in multilateralism. With health security as a key component of well-managed migration, there is also a need for a global dialogue that addresses the links between mobility and health. These two situations, mobility and health, are absolutely indispensable to be reviewed under the framework of human security. For these multilateral and regional approaches will be crucial in the times to come, and even more so for the countries that are being impacted the most, which is exactly the situation we are facing in Mexico and Central America. COVID-19 pandemic will fundamentally reshape the migration, health, and border management landscapes, ensuring that there is an international forum to analyze and exchange information, establish common understandings, and identify gaps will be a key component of multilateralism. A lot has changed over the past 2 decades, and despite the challenges, migration is no longer seen in isolation, and key issues have advanced tremendously. Today, the field is composed of a broader network of actors working on migration, though not always in agreement. As a result of recent electoral developments in my region that we are all aware of, a window of opportunity for multilateralism seems to be around the corner. Such shift in the narrative of a country like the United States will have global ramifications, but let us not forget that multilateral and legal frameworks that lack adequate resources or operational capacity are meaningless to those whom they intended to serve and protect. On the 75th anniversary of the United Nations, it is important to keep in mind that the global framework exists, and this framework applies to all people and to all countries, as the 2030 agenda and its sustainable development goals. I have the last word for the human factor, and I think that we haven't even mentioned that the human factor should be in the focus on every single effort we do to reinforce and strengthen multilateralism. I think that multilateralism needs to prove its effectiveness in order to reshape the world for a better future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, dear Sylvia, for your great remarks on a key issue, migration. Finally, I'm very privileged to give the floor to Arnaud AKODJENOU. He knows very well human mobility, a well-experienced top-level UN diplomat. Arnaud started his career within the United Nations in 1986 in the field at UNHCR office in Djibouti. Since then, he occupied several positions, including acting head of UN mission in Mali and special representative of the Secretary General. Arnaud, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Eric. And I would like to start by really pouring, I would say, a bunch of compliments to you and your team to get organized this panel and to give this opportunity, in particular to me, to learn and to listen to so many distinguished practitioners and academic personality. When I start reflecting on this particular topic, based on your kind invitation, I went through a range of books and listened to or read a range of statements. And particularly last week, I got the privilege to listen to the three-day meeting at the General Assembly related to this particular reform. Why? Because I'm part of those who believe that the common horizon, and that has been said by one of your guests, the common horizon of the multilateralism remain the United Nations as what we have as on top of all institutions, on top of all structure. And then reflecting on where should be the next step, what need to be done in order to revamp this common horizon structure. I was puzzled reading, listening to, and as to some extent a practitioner, I came to the conclusion which became a dilemma for me. I just want to put that dilemma in front of all of you, and I saw your first survey question, and that is part of what I would like to suggest to you and to the team who kindly share their views here. Is what needs to be done, is it to deconstruct this common horizon of multilateralism, or is to reconstruct something totally new? For me, from the two angles, deconstruct or reconstruct, it will be really important to keep in mind what this common horizon structure brought. One of your distinguished guests flagged the beginning of the United Nations. Many made references to his achievement, but what we need to reflect on now is how we can move ahead, how we can maybe readjust or maybe rebuild something totally new. And the Global South contribution on this could be really key because the Global South as such was not part of the construction of the United Nations. At that time, we were talking only, or they were talking only about what one could call essential need. And the essential need at that time was the collective security system to be put in place. Now, Eric and distinguished colleague and friends, we need to move from essential need to existentialist or existential needs. What we have now in front of us, and COVID, the pandemic even make it more and more pressing. Before it was the climate, before was the environment, why the collective security brought peace, and later on add what one could call development, not as appendix, but as something which is part of the peace. And between those two elements, you have the range of freedom, they have the range of human rights issues and structure and institution. Now what we have in front of us is more the existence, how the human being on this earth can get his life improved from peace to development and all this. And the Global South contribution could go through a range of issues. I would like to flag some of them. And I would like also to come with a suggestion. Your structure and those who are around you, those who have the privilege to share their views, they can reflect and push a bit further. What could be or should be the condition or the precondition for what I call reconstruction or deconstruction is that this common horizon multilateral tool shall be an instrument, shall be a political tool which mirror as much as possible all civilization in terms of values, but in the same time, in terms of uniqueness of the civilization, all diversity should be part of that tool in terms of value, in terms of aspiration. That should be the fundamental, I will say, basis for that political tool. And that instrument should be more than ever rooted in the full respect of the human being, of the person, origin, race, religion, gender, you name them, regardless of the nature of their community and regardless of the environment. My third point is to find a way, and once for all, now to bring the primacy of the rule of law and justice into this. My last point in terms of precondition or condition is that for once, the political tool based on the challenges we have been facing should give privilege and to some extent some preeminence to science, science and professionalism. You may challenge me to say, how can you get a political tool with scientific aspect or professional aspect? But we have to reflect and find a way to make sure that those elements are part of that tool. And as next step for the global contribution, before I move to a way to reflect on that proposal, to strategize to get it done, is that while in front of our today common horizon, one can pay more, one can see the way the leadership is played, the way the leadership of what we call the UN or what we call Security Council. I do believe that the Global South contribution could move from this collective security system to something more effective, but dealing really with human security. And the first step should be to make it more operational, but operational in a very collective manner. I will even call it collective leadership. It will not be easy, but what is key is to put an end to what one could call the privilege of some powers or the privilege of some group of powers. My second element here in terms of Global South contribution will be that we go beyond what we call international or transnational line by bringing into this process not only a diversity of actors in terms of states or government, but to make sure that the non-state actors also participate to this process. We cannot continue to talk about government while we know that many of those non-state actors are more powerful than government. And we have to find also the way to pay more attention to civil society. Room should be found to those kind of actors in this common horizon structure we are referring to. And another element the Global South may pay attention to is that within that worldwide tool, when we talk about multilateralism, we have to find a way to give more and more room to the principle of subsidiarity, but a real, not only to have what we call, when we talk about UN, regional or continental institution, but this principle of subsidiarity should leave to each region a full responsibility of what they can do, what they can fix, and what they can operate themselves without any problem, any major intervention or intrusion. But now the question is, what could be the next step? The next, I will make it short, the next step could be that while we are in front of deconstruction or reconstruction, we can let UN as is today continue his way. We just talk about 75 years, but we need to keep the process going by creating, by having or establishing a sound and inclusive process with some willing state, those who just want to deconstruct or to rebuild, along with what I call non-state institution, along with determined institution, Global South structure, academic here, academic apparatus here, influenced there. And that process could be as put in place as fast as possible to reflect on the way next, quote unquote, common horizon structure in terms of multilateralism should be shaped. And with one key point, the consensus should not be should be the way to proceed, but in the same time, it should not be at all costs. I do believe in terms of recommendation or way forward, that working or task force can reflect what could be the next step after 75 years, while in the same time, we are trying to readjust here and there what we have today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, dear Arnaud. And I'm a little bit frustrated because we have so many things to discuss and the time is short, but I'm very glad that we have been able to start, I hope, this conversation. Now, we have many questions. I will just invite our support to show the results of our polling to see. So do you think that the United Nations will still be a relevant global organization 75 years from today? Yes, for 75%. No for 15% and 10 for I don't know. So we can be be optimistic. Now I start a very complex exercise to select the questions, and maybe because of the time, I will select 1 or 2 questions, and each panelist can share his views again and interact with the comment of others. So someone asked, if you panelists, if we see any difference between norms, rule-based practices and international law. Are these parallel concepts, alternatives, complementary concepts? This is a question from Ekaterina Koldunova. So who would like to answer? And then I open the floor to try to have a more inclusive conversation. Feel free, please.
There was a question from Professor Markovic to me.
Yes, please.
Yeah, I don't know whether I have to reply by now, but as he kindly set the question, I think that I have to give an answer.
Please, Bertrand.
Okay, thank you, Professor Markovic, because I think that you put the finger on a very important point, that is the role of China. And that's true that during this conversation, China was not really mentioned. I think that there was a choice, a very crucial choice, which was taken by China in 1955 by Zhou Enlai when he insisted on Mao Zedong for joining the Third World rather than staying in the Soviet bloc. And this is Soviet camp. And this is very, very important because at this time, China flagged the concept of development, that considered itself, first of all, as a developing country. And so joined the Bandung Conference, which took place at this time in 1955. And all the Chinese strategy was to consider that its role in the new world was promoting development. And even now, China considers itself as a developing country, which is a little bit amazing, but something very important for understanding the strategy of China. Of course, there is an evolution, and this evolution really started in 78 during the famous opening policy and the role played by Deng Xiaoping. But something very, very important, that even when China started playing the card of rising power and transforming the world, and even to compete for a role of power and influence on the international order, China refuses to play the same hegemonic card than the Western countries. Because Zhou Enlai himself said something very interesting. That's to say, you Western countries, you spent very much for being hegemons, and you didn't earn a lot. And this is the famous contradiction. That's to say, we don't want to become the new hegemon because we know that you had to pay very much and you didn't get many advantages. And this is interesting because maybe it's a road for the new Global South. That's to say, we have to compete for getting advantages and benefits from globalization, but not for transforming these economic advantages in military power and in a very proactive role on the international political arena. That's to say, we are moving from political international relations to economic and social and intersocial relations which seem much more important in this new world. After I will have to add something, but I will leave the floor to my colleagues.
Thank you very much, Bertrand. Please feel free.
Sorry?
Feel free to react.
To whom are you talking, Eric?
Eric, can I add here something, please?
Yes, please, Anita.
After Bertrand? Yes, thank you. Bertrand, very, very important point, and I'm very happy that you brought out the sort of a historiography of, how China has emerged. And I would like to add here one more thing. Most of us here know that if any country which has really benefited from the global governance systems and the global the rule-based system, then it is China. And it was very well on a pathway of setting a trend for other members of Global South who also aspire to follow a similar sort of a pathway towards prosperity. But that is the twist in the tail that we are all at a crossroads, is that, I mean, there is a general debate that there is an unequal distribution of power within the multilateral system, and that those who are enjoying the current privilege are also the ones who are abusing and neglecting the multilateral fora. But in some way, China has not been able to set a very good example for Global South by sort of introducing a parallel set of systems wherein either you accept their ways or in some way that we are here to give you a far better or a superior system. And also adding to what Bertrand said, that going down the predictable way of using the economic power into military and sort of assuming policing role for itself in the region. So all in all, the success stories of South have not been able to set a very good example for the remaining South. And that itself creates a kind of a schism within the South, and South loses its kind of its voice, both economic and human, in such fora. So yeah. And also there is the example of the previously developed countries. I can give you the example of Asia, which was also the main message, that if this system is not working, multilateralism is not working, let's create parallel regional plurilateral systems, and let's continue to do what we are good at. Doesn't matter if the global systems are not functioning. So that is also in a manner of speaking, an abdication of the responsibility from some of the developed countries surrounding the South in Asia. So these are two important points I would like to add to where Bertrand left his comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anita. I see Bertrand who would like to speak. But I also have a question for Aigul here. And maybe if you agree, Bertrand, I will first of all give the floor to Aigul by reading this question from Madeleine. I will be very curious to hear a bit more from panel members, especially Aigul, how some of the institutional foundation of the UN could or should be adapted to allow the institution to better respond to some of the challenges raised? This is a question for Aigul, but for all of you. Aigul, and after Jack, please.
Yeah. Thank you. Maybe I would like to speak of the first question about the difference between norm, rule-based, and international law. Norms, rule-based practices, and international law. Are they parallel, alternative, or complementary concept? So I think our last colleague, Dr. Arnaud, he referred to the norm subsidiarity. If we pick up on this norm, it has been proposed by the Global South as an alternative, right, to international law, which was structured according to the projections of more powerful states. So I think it is a stage process, the development of any norm or practice. First, if we take this norm subsidiarity, it was proposed as an alternative concept. Now it is developing as a parallel concept. Maybe it will in the future complement. So this will partially cover the question of the second participant about the institution that need UN, the United Nations, or a foundational institution that were founded in Bretton Woods, right? So today is one of the heated topics is the reformation of the Security Council, right? Whether those 5 permanent members should remain or should be added. And there are key players from Asia, from the Asian continents, who wish to join the Security Council as permanent members. And this conversation will continue. So I was surprised actually to see the poll result that 75% of all participants have big optimism and hopes for the current United Nations. But I think this institution should change. And actually now, the main challenge of UN or global multilateralism is the regionalization of international relations. The creation of regional institutions such as ASEAN in Asia, the African Union and the Romanian sub-regional African frameworks, institutional frameworks, and also in Central Asia or in a broader sense in post-Soviet space, there are also some developments are going on. And in Latin America as well, right? Mercosur and others, they were originally established as trade organizations, but now they are extending to include even security frameworks. So I think what we are seeing now are signs of big and important changes. So many panelists have addressed the problem of exclusion today and inclusion. They always move in parallel. So we cannot get away from exclusion, but inclusion can be expanded if actors of the Global South raise voices through their regional frameworks and extend to global. Here, the United Nations, probably, because we have more optimism for this organization. I'm optimistic about the United Nations, but not as it is now. It will eventually change. It will be reformed.
Thank you very much, Aigul. And you are right. Everybody now agrees for the need to change the system we have today. And I know Jacques who would like to speak, and Bertrand also. Jacques first, please. Bertrand after that.
Eric, first of all, I would like to thank Professor Bertrand Batty and Anita for their consideration about China. My impression that we have to have a full session on China and the South, because clearly there is a transformation, a metamorphosis regarding China. And what do we need is to avoid this kind of option that developing countries and emerging economies should have. I mean, you have to align or with the US or with China. And if you don't align with one of the two, then you are excluded. And technology is one of the examples that we are facing at the present time. So we have to discuss it. And these are the, let's say, the non-aligned with China and or with the US should get together and discuss how to deal with this new situation that is presenting. Regarding the UN, I fully agree with what was said. When I voted that the UN will continue, it will continue because there is a need to meet all together in some place and to have an opportunity to debate, discuss. Now, maybe, and I remember that when Mr. Guterres was being elected, there was a discussion on what was called the sunset clause. The sunset clause, it's an idea that when you create an agency, you can create it for 20, 30, 50, or 100 years, but sometimes you have to put a clause saying that 10 years before the échéance, people should get together and decide if this agency should continue the way it is, it should continue at all, it should be reformed. And what we see is that many agencies are being hostage of their past. I mean, the Security Council is an example, it was mentioned now, but we can find this in many, even the World Health Organization, when we discussed how the World Health Organization should face a pandemic. Obviously, it's not the decision-making structure of today. We have to find new ways to decide. So the idea of a sunset clause in the building up of a multilateral institution maybe should be something to be discussed. We have clubs like the Good Practice Club of OECD. We should look at these type of examples, how they work, why they are functioning, how they could be improved, and then inspiring our own institution to promote multilateralism. Thank you very much, Eric.
Thank you, Jacques. Before I give the floor to Bertrand, I would like to put in perspective the main idea of Arnaud: reconstruction or deconstruction, collective project, common horizon, or something new. But Bertrand, please.
Yes, very briefly. I'm sorry to to occupy the floor. First of all, I want to say that I totally agree with Anita and Jacques about China and the role of China. Of course, China is not representative of the future of the Global South and the future and the transformation of international order for two very, very, very important reasons. The first reason is that we are moving from a national conception of security to a global conception of security. The main threat which is at stake by now is not a threat coming from an enemy, but it's a threat coming from the system, as we can observe with the COVID-19 or with the food insecurity or with the environment insecurity. So the main point that we have to take into account when we are discussing about the international order, but also when we are discussing about the contribution of Global South to the peace or to the international stability, is in terms of global stability and global security. And that's why the lonely success, the individual success, is not a good news if it is not transformable to a global success. And global success can be reached only through governance and through multi-governance. That is the first point. And the second point is that we are moving from a Westphalian world which was made of power competition. Power competition was ruling the world, but now power competition is not ruling the world. It's over. now, what is shaping the world, what is shaping the international agenda is weakness competition. Weakness is the main factor of structuration of the international agenda. The war now is no more triggered by a power competition, but is triggered by weakness, weakness of states, weakness of nations, weakness of social bounds, weakness of economics, and so on. The Sahel war is not a power competition, but a real weakness competition. And so that's why the main point that we have to look at now is power, there is weakness, the evolution of weakness, and how to contain, to rule, and to give a minimal world order to this weakness competition.
Thank you very much, Bertrand, with this idea of weakness competition. But you mentioned also this idea of global stability through governance. And I would like to invite very briefly Sylvia to elaborate around migration governance, because I do believe that human mobility and all of you mentioned the need to come back to human being, but human being move. And you know how it's very difficult today to deal with these migration dynamics and human mobility. So Sylvia, I would like to hear you here before I give the floor to Arnaud with this puzzle to tell us if we have to deconstruct or reconstruct. Sylvia, please.
I believe that we are fortunate that the global compact on migration do exist, but I think it is a very, very young instrument that has not been able to. I mean, this instrument needs to be known by common people, and so this is one of my worries, that the United Nations and their agencies basically remain in relation with governments. And in some countries with the special communities that they are working, they have hands-on in them, but this is not enough. I think that to talk about migration needs to be even a topic that needs to be addressed at the school level worldwide. We need to understand that human mobility it has been existing since human beings, that this is a fundamental right, and we need to spread the word about the added value of such instruments as the Global Compact. But this is not being done, and I don't know what sort of instrument we need to create in order to spread the word. And I think that I agree completely on what some of our colleagues mentioned regarding the relevance of civil society and emerging actors at the level of civil society that have the possibility to be in touch with larger audiences in order to rethink about what the world is, and the right to mobility for all human beings. So I don't know if this answers my questions. We cannot remain discussing these issues at the level of only government and at the level of elites. We need to go down to grassroots level in order to so that the society in each country will understand what is involved in terms of human mobility, and they need to learn to appreciate what migration is all about.
Thank you very much, Sylvia. And Arnaud mentioned actually civil society as a key component. So Arnaud, reconstruction, deconstruction. But Aigul, do you want to add something before Arnaud will give us a new picture of the
yes.
puzzle?
Yes, speaking of the Global Compact on migration, it is a recent development and it is a legally non-binding instrument. So I wonder if Sylvia could a bit go deeper. So she asked herself this important question: what kind of instrument should be developed in order to improve this area, right? Migration. So what do you think, Sylvia, if and why, right? If a convention, migration convention, is finally adopted and ratified, will this help to improve these issues? And why this conventions in prospect, this convention's development is too slow? Because we have another important convention, Refugee Convention of 1951. Why don't we have a migration convention? Because compact is a legally non-binding. It's not so effectual, but important development, I think.
Thank you very much, Aigul, for this great question. I have some insight, but first of all, Sylvia, please.
Well, I think that in order to launch this relevant issue as migration in current times, it was not possible to launch it as a binding one. I don't think that would have been the wiser thing to start with such a challenging situation. So this needs to come gradually, and I think that specifically the COVID-19 times is maybe the right moment to start pushing forward this initiative to become a binding instrument. We need to wait and see how the United States, well, I'm talking from my geographical perspective because I cannot talk about the whole world, but I think that the position of the United States in terms of the Global Compact and coming back to a very proactive situation in this trend might help a lot in order to lean forward in such a trend. We also are expecting what Biden has the promise yesterday that he's going to recapture the hospitality of the United States for thousands and thousands of refugees. And I know that Europe is in great need of a larger demographic proposal. And so this is the right moment to create a new narrative with the support, even with the entertainment industry. I mean, I think that we are talking about big issues always with the same, and I'm going to say it clearly, with a very masculine power perspective, and we need more women to speak out loud with a different narrative. For example, we should focus more on caring and sharing that from a power perspective. I think this is possible because nowadays millions and millions of people all over the world are suffering, and they are expecting to hear voices full with passion and hopefulness, and not only power.
Thank you very much, Sylvia. And Aigul raised a critical issue, because migration calls a dilemma, which is how to continue to keep the Westphalian right of member states of the international system, but in the same time provide a legal framework to facilitate mobility of human beings. I've been privileged to support the African group here in Geneva during the negotiation of the Global Compact. And I can share with you a great example of Africa as part of the Global South, which push for having more freedom in terms of mobility within the African continent. And you probably heard about this AFTC, African Free Trade Zone, which is for goods, but also for persons, people to move around. So I think it's a great example because migration should be viewed more and more beyond a securitized perspective. Here is the key issue. The global level used to deal with migration in a very securitized perspective, hard security, and we need to consider it more as part of human societies and manage it differently. And I think the regional level is key to achieve substantial progress before trying to have something very global. But Arnaud, you have your puzzle, deconstruct, reconstruct.
Yeah, Eric, thank you. Thank you for allowing me to elaborate further on this. But I'm pleased to see the outcome of the survey. You see, that means that we still need this common horizon in terms of multilateralism. What we have today is the UN, it's the United Nations. But the point is, do we believe that in 20 years from now or 30 years from now, we should continue with the same? Because when we are talking about adjustment, yes, here and there, United Nations went through a range of adjustments, Sometimes it's related to the membership, related to the team, or related to the environment. But what we need, and we need to sit down and start reflecting on what really we need. What we need is something which will allow this world, quote unquote, not anymore to go through collective security system, but something totally different, which means that we move from essential to what is becoming more and more existential. And what we have in front of us cannot allow us to change this. It's why my dilemma, okay, we can rebuild something totally new, but how can you get that from day one to day two? Or you can deconstruct something, and that will take more time than what you compare with the pressing matter this world has to go through.
Thank you very much.
We need United Nations. We need United, but do we need the one we have today, or do we need to reflect on how we can progressively present something which, to be honest with you, can replace what we have now? We will not thrashing away the baby and the water, but at least we will take what we learned from that and now cement on that what is needed for the future of the world.
Thank you very much, Arnaud. I think we have to close in a couple of minutes. Maybe a last comment, remarks. Un dernier tour de table alors, sinon, thank you very much. If someone want to say something.
Eric, do you have any questions from the floor, from the
audience?
Yes,
we have many questions, but we can continue to speak by tomorrow. But we cover several of these questions. One in particular was about how to distribute and make the Global South more efficient within the multilateralism. So I think we covered this through different pathways. There is another question on how to adapt institutions to better respond to some challenges raised. So it is the issue Arnaud mentioned, deconstruct, reconstruct. How can we reinvent or invent a new UN system to be more efficient, basically? And we can close on that. Okay. So you will agree with me to say that we need to convey another conversation, a second episode. Thank you very much for being with me this morning, this afternoon or this evening. Merci beaucoup pour cette discussion très stimulante. Merci à nos partenaires. Thank you very much to ISA and to our UN partners for having this. And thank you to you, distinguished panelists, for being with me today.